So we're going to talk about global trends in mobile gaming and external development. I'm Jason Harris.
I'm Lauren Freeman. I'm a senior manager on the Xdi team and based right here in Seattle.
And I think we have about 5 hours or so to go through this presentation, so the doors are locked, right? Yep. So you can't escape. I hope you'll enjoy it. If you don't understand my accent, it's because I'm from Texas, but hopefully you'll be able to work through that.
So real quick, who is Xdi? Xdi is the External Development Intelligence team at EA. We're a central team that's part of the business development organization, and we support all of EA studios worldwide with any external development needs that they have. You can see at the bottom of the slide some of the different disciplines that we cover. Who is EA? I'm sure most of the folks in the audience know who Electronic Arts is, but maybe you're not familiar with all of the different brands on the mobile side. So we cover a wide variety of genres, from sports with FIFA and UFC. On the mid-core side, we've got Sims free-to-play, and of course, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. And on the more casual side, we've got brands like PvZ, Plants vs. Zombies, and Bejeweled, which is made right here in Seattle at our talented PopCap studio. Where is EA Mobile? We're all over the world in a nutshell. We've got studios in Helsinki, in Australia, in Japan, in Burnaby, right here in Seattle, and other areas as well.
And to wake you up, here's a short reel. So as I said, we're going to talk about a few trends in the industry, and the XDS event had written a free white paper surveying people on external development. So we're going to talk about some of those things covered in the white paper and then relate them to different trends in the industry. This survey covered 60 different developers, publishers, over 150 different service providers, and collected data from over 40 countries. So in this white paper, they found that the client portfolio for service providers on the mobile side increased on the outside from 10% in 2012 to 21% of their client portfolio were mobile developers in 2017. On the engineering side, it increased from 6% to 29% of their client portfolio were mobile developers. So a huge increase in the number of mobile developers leveraging service providers. And when we asked those mobile developers why they're using external partners, number one answer, scalability. So to be able to scale up talent quickly to create the large games that are needed today. So that was the number one reason. Number two reason was cost savings. Number three reason, access hard to find skills. Number four, lack of available local resources. So they needed to go to other markets to get those resources. Followed by supporting content needs for live services to speed up development through the follow-the-sun model. So when we looked at what they were sending externally, the interesting thing is that a lot of the 2D work associated to mobile was only sent externally about 2 to 4 years ago. So you can see mobile usage of service providers is relatively new compared to console, which started about 10 years ago.
So a quick overview of the high-level trends that we're seeing in the industry and how they tie back to the impact on external development. We're going to start with the overall growth of the markets, and then we're going to move to more players consuming more content in our games, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the technology and the proliferation of devices.
So in terms of the growth, any estimates on the size of the games industry?
$5.
$5? Almost. It's about $99.6 billion, which represents an 8.5% increase over the prior year. And the forecast for this year is about $109 billion, which represents about a 10% increase. So just to provide a comparative point, The music industry is about 15.1 billion, and the box office about 38 billion. So the games industry is bigger than these two combined. Then when we look at the market around the world, you can see huge growth in Asia Pacific. For the first time ever, the Chinese market surpassed the US market in terms of overall size, and huge growth in Latin America at about 20%. What's interesting is when you look at things like smartphone penetration and internet penetration in these markets, you can see some very low internet penetration with 33% in Southeast Asia, over here 53% in Central America. So as more people in these markets get access to smartphones and get access to an internet connection, you could really see these numbers increase even further and a lot more people playing games in these markets. And when we look at the size of the mobile industry, which is about 41 billion, just as a comparison again, that's larger than the box office revenue. So mobile is expected to grow quite rapidly. At the moment, it's about 29% of the market, and by 2020, expected to hit about 40% of the overall games market. And what's amazing is when you look at countries like China, where by 2020, mobile revenue alone is expected to represent 17% of worldwide games revenue, and in the market itself, increased to 63% of the overall market. So huge growth in China and a lot of these other emerging markets.
So to summarize and to tie back some of the trends that Jason just presented and how it's impacting what we're seeing on the external dev side of things, to start with the overall market growth, there's an increase in mobile developers where traditionally there was kind of folks focused on console and on mobile. There's people that are now focused on both, service providers that are focused on both. With the growth across emerging markets, there's a lot more service providers that are offering culturalization, and that includes localization type of services. And then finally, mobile games gaining popularity in China. There is some concern that where, folks that are in the Western developers that are leveraging Chinese partners, there's been an increase in those same partners having more Chinese clients in their portfolio, and an increase in the percentage of the work that represents overall for them. So there could be a shortage at those partners in the future. So moving on, more players consuming more content. Traditionally, developers really cared primarily about the core gamers, right? So these are the folks that are playing on console and PC. They've got familiarity with different game genres and the different likes and dislikes they have about the games they're playing and familiarity with the controls. Where nowadays, there's this huge general population of gamers. There's, people out there that are playing games on their mobile devices in line at the grocery store or whether they're picking up their kids at school, and they don't consider themselves gamers. So what that means is there's a convergence, and that audience is actually maturing, and they're starting to know about the likes and dislikes with games and become more familiar with the inputs and controls. And so there's a convergence between these two audiences, while mobile gamers, more casual mobile gamers, are now looking to new platforms like console and PC to deliver their experiences, and vice versa, where console players are looking to mobile to deliver the types of games that they want to play.
And as most of you have noticed, gaming is really increasing as both a passive form of entertainment and an interactive form of entertainment. On the interactive side, the top grossing film of all time, Avatar, grossed about $3.2 billion in 55 months. When you compare that to the most successful mobile game, Clash of Clans, grossed $3.8 billion in 55 months also. So another example of games just outpacing movies. In terms of a passive form of entertainment, everybody here is familiar with Netflix. That has about 104 million subscribers. When you compare that to Twitch, 185 million average viewers per month, so huge. And as you know, Twitch is starting to extend into mobile gaming and have partnered with BlueStacks for you now to be able to stream mobile games on the platform. And it's not only Twitch. When you look at YouTube as well, 517 million views of game videos in 2016. Absolutely huge. And that's larger than people who are watching HBO, Netflix, ESPN, and Hulu combined. And when you look at the top influencers on YouTube, Number 1 is PewDiePie, as many of you know, with about 55 million subscribers. Number 2 is not game related, but then number 3 again is very similar to PewDiePie, but in the Spanish language. So 2 of the top influencers are within the games industry.
Another trend that has been happening for a while now is, for those of you who have worked in mobile social for a while, we used to design for MVP, right, the minimal viable, and you'd launch and then you could optimize from there. Nowadays, that's just not something that we can do anymore. Partially, the cost of advertising has increased, so in order to keep your CPIs down, I mean, with the amount of branded entertainment that's entering the storefronts, it's next to impossible to rely on organic installs, and so a lot of developers are thinking, how can I design for a long-term value of our players and keep them in game, and that cost of having them install in the first place is then reduced because they're sticking with your title year over year. And so that lends itself to things like increased features at launch, preparing post-launch content before you launch, and making sure that you've got adequate post-launch content, events, robust live operations and services. It kind of ticks all of the different areas in game development. So to summarize, again, the trend, the mobile audience is maturing, and what that means is that service providers who are traditionally working on console are now looking at mobile as a viable opportunity, and vice versa. The players that are engaging with new platform or via new passive and interactive channels, we're seeing an increase in service providers who are, saying that they're experts in video production and integrating with social media channels, Twitch and YouTube. And then players are consuming more content faster and quicker. So leveraging service providers to expand on your content to make sure that you have adequate content and features at launch. So there's actually an increase in demand for service providers to support that, and live services content as well. There's a lot of service providers out there who are now offering robust live services, and they can take your game over after you've launched. The last trend that we're going to talk about today is the proliferation of devices and technological advances. How many people in the audience know who this guy is? Somebody shout out his name if you know it. Did I hear Roger Moore? No, that's Gordon Moore. Gordon Moore, in 1965, who's a co-founder of Intel, he predicted that the number of transistors on a circuit would increase every 2 years. So really, all of you that have smartphones in your pocket, you can thank this guy's prediction for coming true. This here is the Cray 2 supercomputer that was made in 1985. I mean, look at that. It looks like something out of a Doctor Who television show for those fans in the audience. And then this is the 2012, oops, I need to look at my crypt notes here. It's the iPhone 5. So literally 27 years, and you go from this massive supercomputer to this little iPhone, and this thing represents 2 times the processing power of the Cray. So the iPhone wins the UFC championship for processing power. Another quick little demo of this. Actually, happy birthday, iPhone, 10 years with iPhones. If you take any one of these specs on the left here and look across the table, I think one of the most indicative of processing power increasing is GPU. We started with a single core processor, now 6-core, Power VR, and who knows what's to come with the new iPhone. Sorry guys, I'm not gonna unveil the iPhone. We don't have that information as a team. So what about Android? Here's a fun one. So this is the S6 device, which I happen to own myself. How many PlayStation 2s do you think are the equivalent in processing power? Someone shout out a number. No, not quite. Over. 5. So 5 PlayStation 2s. And that's a difference in release date of about 15 years. So you can see that technology is rapidly improving for processing power. Here's an example of, the more powerful devices, right? These are some titles that shipped within the last year and really represent some of the best that's out there in terms of fidelity and gameplay experience that's moving the needle on what mobile devices are capable of and pushing the envelope on performance. This lovely little graphic here is from 2012, and it represents the device fragmentation with Android. If you look at the upper left, that big green box, that was the device in 2012 that most consumers were purchasing. And if you fast forward to 2015, unfortunately, this graphic hasn't been updated since then. But you can see that top quadrant there. I mean, that's probably about 12 devices that used to be one. And I'm sure that it's even more fragmented today. This graphic, there's 25,000 plus Android devices available as of 2015, so that number has just increased. I think it includes some smart fridges as well in that graphic. There's more ways to play mobile games. Here are the existing ways that we're all familiar with as mobile developers, smart devices and handheld. But look at the emerging ways to play. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the converging gameplay, that we've got stuff like the PlayStation PlayLink that you can now use your mobile phone to connect to your console and use that as a controller and play more, mobile-centric games on console. And then, of course, the multitude of headsets that are compatible with mobile devices for VR. So there's many, many different ways to play now.
When we're talking about tech, we can't forget about VR and AR. If you look at the forecasts, they're huge. So on the VR side, by 2020, they expect the market to be about 38 billion over at Superdata. And DigiCapital expects the AR/VR market to be about 120 billion. And now there are people out there, if you've seen John Riccatello from Unity's presentations recently, he expects these predictions to be a lot lower. But because of these huge forecasts, a lot of service providers are very, very confident about AR and VR. And in the survey that was sent out, almost 40% of service providers expected VR and AR to be the #1 driver of external development demand. When we asked our peers at developers and publishers, they only said about 10% said that it would be a driver of demand. So very different there. And only about 14% said that they were actually working on a VR, AR experience at the moment. So a huge disconnect between the service providers and a lot of the developers and publishers on VR and AR. And we looked into this a little bit further, and this is probably the reason for it. When you look at a lot of other industries, you can see they're adopting VR, AR very quickly, from the retail side to automotive, education. A lot of them are embracing VR, AR with a lot of different experiences.
So what does the future hold? Really, it's hard to know. I mean, if any of you had a beeper 10, 15 years ago in your pocket, even longer than that probably, and now you have a smartphone, a computer in your pocket, right? It's really hard to extrapolate what's to come. It's important as developers that we look towards the future and kind of look at things like machine learning, AI, procedural art. That's something that we've been looking at. How is that going to impact external dev? It's really up to us to do the research and understand what's coming down the pipeline. So to summarize, an increase in devices and platforms with players that are now engaging cross-platform, that just means that we're going to see more service providers providing porting as a service. Device certification is something that a lot of service providers are now mentioning. A demand for deeper, richer, highly engaging mobile games. That means that there's an increase for service providers who are working in 3D, high-fidelity art, and server-side engineering. And then new technology opening up opportunities. The note here is that if service providers go all in on a new technology too fast, they could find themselves in trouble. So there's a word of caution there. However, there's also new industries entering the market. And so as game developers, again, we really need to learn what we can about what's coming down the pipeline and decide what makes sense for ourselves in terms of investment. This is just a graph that shows it used to be okay, or possible to develop mobile games with mostly full-time employees. And then maybe as things, picked up pace and you needed to scale, you could layer on some temporary or contractors. But this day and age, it takes a small army to develop a mobile game, and we're only expecting that to increase. And because of the different things we covered today, so the geographic expansion, more ways to play, greater accessibility and diversity of gameplay experiences, mobile tech advancements, and live operations, which we didn't cover in depth today, but that's one that people should definitely keep a pulse on, and the need for more content overall.
So that covers things at a very, very high level in the 20 minutes we have. Any questions?
Thanks, Lauren and
Thank you.
Jason, for bringing this one of the most, what I personally think, one of the most insights-packed, beautifully prepared and gracefully delivered talk. So in terms of the goals of what EA has done for with interviewing these developers and service providers, I wonder what do you think from EA? What do you think that means to the smaller developers and the indie developers here? So what kind of opportunities you can bring from EA to these smaller developers?
So in terms of EA's opportunities for smaller developers,
yes.
Well, for our particular group, so the External Development Intelligence team, we look for service providers that can span across multiple disciplines. We really look for teams that are offering services, though, for work for hire, right, to support our game teams, as opposed to independent developers who are only working on original IP, but you don't have a strategy to support service work. That's important to us because we want to make sure that when we engage you, that you're not going to decide, next week that it's not a priority for your team. So I would, suggest that if there are, teams out there in the audience that offer services in any of the areas that we cover, so that's art, animation, mobile game development, porting, engineering, new and emerging tech, and you're offering those as a service, please, feel free to talk to us at the show, and we'd be happy to tell you more about our team.
And to cover our support of indie developers, so many of you are probably familiar with our EA Originals program, which we recently launched to support indie developers on the PC side. So we give $5 million to support the indie, and then following the localization and QA costs, we give 100% of the profits back to the indie developers. That's something we're doing on the PC side. You never know in the future on the mobile side.
Can you tell me or share with us the top challenges that you face dealing with an external development team, someone who's really not under your direct control, as opposed to having it done in-house?
It really depends on how long we've been working with those companies. So a lot of our partners we've been working with for many, many years. There was actually data in this industry report on the top challenges faced by both the developers, publishers, and the service providers. It's not in this presentation, but if you download the presentation, you can see that. The top challenge cited in the white paper was communication. That varies from, it can be language, it also can be just communicating the creative vision for the project so that everybody's on the same page.
Project management methodology is something that comes up. It's really a project by project. It depends on, each team is kind of a unique snowflake with their own requirements. And if you don't find a team that really blends well with those requirements, that's where you have issues. And they're not unsolvable issues as long as you can drill down and understand where they stem from. Our team does a lot of work supporting the pipeline. We're not just at the front of the pipeline suggesting teams. We actually can get involved and do retrospectives, and if we have to, really dig in the weeds to understand what's going on with an engagement, because it's our, goal as a team to make sure that EA is one of the best partners out there to work with for external partners.
I think quality is sometimes an issue that many face. Just hitting internal benchmarks, it takes a long time to ramp up an external team to hit those quality benchmarks and exactly what you're trying to achieve with your game.
Planning. On the mobile side, planning is something that's difficult, right? When we need to hit the ground running and have our game design, everything up front, it's not console where you have kind of cyclical, some mobile game teams are kind of operating in that way now, but there's a lot more that are not, and it's difficult to have an established plan and move forward without any iteration, right? So that's something that we see as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.